Hello, just a couple of quick notes before we get started here. First and foremost, I will be showing some footage from what I guess you would consider to be like the mid-game, and since this is a game that has such a huge emphasis on exploration, if you don't feel like watching me explore some of these environments and find some of the little tiny secrets and things like that, just skip. It's okay if you don't feel like watching the video until you've played the game for yourself. And beyond that, I've also noticed that in the capture footage I have, there's quite a bit of like low-res artifacting. There's like the stair-step effect you'll see all over the place, and even some frame drops. Those were not present in the game while I was playing. That just comes down to my capture software and my capture specs and all that kind of stuff. So just wanted to make that clear before we get started. But with that out of the way, please enjoy the video. Tinykin is just a fantastic game. In fact, it's such a fantastic game that I'm making a video about it, despite the fact that my videos about video games do not tend to do very well at all. And even when they do well, nobody subscribes, nobody sticks around. I don't know, it's just kind of strange. But it's a medium that I love to talk about. It's a medium that I love to engage with, and despite the fact that YouTube is extremely oversaturated with gaming content and commentary and analysis and trailer breakdowns and parodies and documentaries and game jams and development how-tos, I thought I may as well add another piece of wood to the fire because I just feel so strongly about the game. This is a game from a studio that I haven't heard of before. Here is the name on the screen, and maybe the information about where they're based, because I don't even know that. I don't know where these people came from. I saw they had a developer stream up on Steam recently, a couple days before release. Feels like something made by a relatively large team. Have no idea whether that's accurate, but I'll say more than 5 people, maybe even more than 10 people made the game. Haven't watched the credits yet, so that's when I'll find my answer. But just in terms of how well developed the game is visually, and in terms of just overall concept, I have to assume that regardless of the size of the team, they come across as very experienced and they come across as very creative. And I really appreciate both of those traits. And in the case of Tinykin, wow, so many ways in which this game is just so friendly to you as the player. It's so colorful right from the get-go. And I just can't go much further without at least mentioning like the texture work in this game. Like, oh my goodness, so many different surfaces and objects and platforms and such. Like, there's just such a neat look to all of it. There's sort of a light painted quality to some of it in terms of how the colors are distributed, but then you have these finer textures on top of it all. But if you look closely at them, they're not actually that complex, and in fact some of that style might be a way to kind of hide lower detail textures and models, because that's a trick that devs have been doing for a while now. But even if that's what it is, great job. You hit it really well, and it just looks stylish. It just looks really pleasant all the time. It doesn't look cheap, it doesn't look low budget. And even the weirdness of the fact that like all our characters, all of our moving active characters in the game, are just 2D sprites that have this interesting rotation. Their movement is 3D, but they consistently just look like little 2D sprites. Sort of the Paper Mario thing, but sort of not. And especially the way that these sprites look when you're rotating the camera. I don't know, some people might find it a little strange or off-putting in some way, but I just think it looks kind of cool, and I wouldn't expect this combination to work, but it really does, at least for me. Great looking game, and as you've already been seeing, no doubt, the setting for the whole thing is just like a very typical house. It's just a house, and going along with the title, you're very, very small, and you are navigating this world through the help of the Tinykin, which are basically just Pikmin. They said, we need something that looks like Pikmin. This is sort of a Pikmin style game, kinda. So they created these really cute looking little one-eyed creatures like Pikmin. There are several different varieties, and each variety of Tinykin has its own special ability, and that's like the one thing that you're supposed to use them for. That's the one type of job that they get as you're navigating the different zones of the game. Premise, we're sort of a space traveler crash landing on Earth, and then we're trying to get back home, and for some reason that involves collecting a bunch of mundane objects, which sort of reminded me of like the Lego movie or like Bug's Life or something like that, where they these little tiny creatures like have a very different view of what these human objects are. And then throughout each zone, we find one or multiple species of insect that are just kind of hanging out and having their own distinct societies. A little bit strange, and at least so far, I don't necessarily see like an underlying reason for the choice to include all these elements. Maybe there's going to be a big twist at the end, a sort of sci-fi twist. I don't know. Maybe there's a reason why all of the insects here are anthropomorphic and like conscious and all that kind of stuff. For the moment, these are all just elements that I just kind of roll along with because I like the gameplay and I like the world. Hi, quick insert here. I have since finished the game. I do know how the story ends, and obviously I won't spoil it, but very unexpected, genuinely pretty strange. I really enjoyed it. I really love these environments. Something you get a sense for very quickly, I'll say it's basically after the tutorial section of the game, is the sheer size and breadth and complexity of each of the game's zones. I think there are 6 total. I haven't finished yet, so there might be more. We'll see about that. But you're essentially just in a single room for each of these levels. Here is a bedroom, here is a living room, here is a bathroom, stuff like that. At first, just kind of seems like, oh, kind of gimmicky, kind of fun. And in fact, we have somewhat recently had some of the best, like miniature, typical household inspired environments in any game ever from It Takes Two, which did a fantastic job of sort of making this Toy Story inspired world, sort of, but and then these common elements and objects become fantastical and lit ablaze by the spark of imagination and all that kind of stuff. However, if you played through that game, you'll know that while certain larger areas are very interactable and have a lot of little things to do and mini games and all that, a lot of other areas are just incredibly linear tunnels that you just sort of cruise right through, and the critical path is very obvious, and that's that. Here, I would say it's a very different approach in terms of presenting the player with their objectives and then just sort of side missions and collectibles and all that. The main objective of each level is very clear, and they maybe even go a smidge too far in terms of like pointing out exactly what you need to do to move on to the next level. But yeah, they'll show you, okay, talk to this character, then that character tells you about a specific object in the room that you need to get or bring back or take somewhere else. Then they just kind of set you loose in the room. And that is the best part, because ultimately, despite the Pikmin style trappings here, it's a very different game in terms of design and genre, even, I would argue. So despite the fact that you are using little tiny creatures to do various jobs and solve various puzzles throughout a zone, that was really only part of what was happening in Pikmin. Obviously, you're using Pikmin of various types to solve different problems and all that, but a huge component of the Pikmin games is, well, for one thing, combat of some kind and giant boss battles and all things like that. But in addition, time management. Time management is massive. You have a limited amount of time in each day. You know, you have to accomplish a series of major tasks to survive and move on and progress through the game. Here in Tinykin, no. Super laid back, zero combat. That's just not a mechanic here. Maybe it'll crop up by surprise at some point, but I don't think it will. So most of the gameplay is just being let loose. I won't call it open world because it's not. And even the term open zone feels wrong. Open level, sort of kind of like some of the 3D Mario games, 64, Sunshine, Odyssey, where you have these big kind of sandbox style spaces and there's just a lot to do. And this is definitely an area where I think the game shines, and this is definitely the gameplay loop that keeps bringing me back to this thing very often. In fact, I played the demo itself like 3 or 4 times just because I loved the experience of exploring some of these spaces. And my goodness, here in the full game, I've gone across 4 of the major levels so far. And for one thing, they only seem to get bigger and more interesting, and they all have delightful little quirks and visual identities, which are very strong. But my goodness, the sheer amount of stuff that they have given you to collect and to interact with, and shortcuts to unlock that make it easier to move around, surfaces they've given you to slide around on your soap board with. The soap board is this little like skateboard basically that lets you move pretty darn fast, and it's shockingly fun to use. in general, I really think they did an excellent job of nailing down movement in this game, which, boy, oh boy, is someone gonna get mad at me for making too many Mario comparisons? Like, that's always been a core component of the Mario games, even going back to the early 2D games. The movement has to feel really good. The controls have to feel tight and responsive and reliable and intuitive, and they do here. I won't say that Tinykin controls like Super Mario Sunshine, like it's not insanely snappy and responsive and perfect, but it does feel very good, and the fact that they just keep giving you ways to move around a specific level, it's excellent. There are these like zip line things that you grind on basically, and you can unlock some of them. Some are there from the get-go. You can also grind along just like the edge of a lot of objects and platforms, which is pretty neat. And then of course the platforming itself, just the jumping and gliding, it's been very satisfying for me so far. I've never felt like I didn't understand whether or not I could get to another platform or another part of the room. And there are also ways to upgrade the character's ability, specifically the glide, which is a bubble, which is adorable in itself and fits the overall tone of the game very well. You can find expansion pieces, almost like a Metroid game, where you get little pieces of an upgrade, and then if you get enough cool, it combines into a whole new stamina ring. So that lends it a nice sense of progression, although outside of that, the progression really just comes from the joy of finding stuff and collecting stuff. So discovery within exploration is definitely a huge part of Tinykin. There's just so much. I guess Odyssey would be the go-to comparison here, where you just feel like there's always something cool to find. Like if you just mess around for a while and explore all the nooks and crannies, chances are there's gonna be something there and you're gonna be satisfied by finding it, and it's gonna inspire you to look for more stuff. Now, I won't say that this game offers the same level of variety and those sorts of secrets and level details that Odyssey did, but even so, even if you're just finding like the basic currency in the game, which is nectar, I believe, just the sound design in general is fantastic. Specifically in collecting different stuff and having your Tinykin do different things. It's just so pleasant to interact with. And this is yet another thing that not only the Mario games, but plenty of Nintendo first-party developed games have nailed for many years now, is how things feel to play. And a lot of that comes down to controls and sound design. Boy, oh boy, did they nail it here. Every single time I pick up a little piece of nectar, that was worth it. That felt great. Every time that I nail a jump, the way that the bubble drains and pops as you're gliding, the way that the little green Tinykins stack on top of each other, and the sound it makes when they collapse when you call them all back. Oof, it's so pleasant. What a pleasant experience that's still just spewing this massive amount of creativity. And that's big for me. The specific execution of the visuals, tone, writing of Tinykin just strikes such a chord with me, and most importantly of all, gives me these fantastic in-game spaces that I want to be in. Like, I want to spend time in the game, and that goes such a long way to encouraging me to pick it up again and continue to interact with it and continue to discover new secrets, new levels, etc. I wonder if there are any major downsides that I should touch on here. Personally, I haven't really come up against many elements or aspects of the game that have felt grating to me. Usually with games that have, a combination of platforming and puzzling, I have those inevitable moments where I get hung up on something and I just don't really feel like working it out and sitting there for 10 minutes and finding the solution on my own instead of looking up a guide. None of that here, and for one thing, the puzzles are not really puzzles in most cases. Like, it's pretty simple stuff. There's a lot of fetch quest stuff for the side missions. There are instances where you have to clear a path for Tinykin to bring something that you're carrying, to its ultimate destination. You also have to do a little tiny bit of management of specific types of Tinykin to solve various problems. There are ways that certain Tinykin can get hung up on a specific task, so you can't use them until they finish that. You might have to unlock something to get to that point. So there are situations where I felt like I had some downtime and I was frantically running around the level to find what I could do next or what I was supposed to be doing next. However, it never got to the point where it was more than a couple of minutes. I never got hung up. I never felt the need to check a guide for anything at all. It's mostly pretty straightforward stuff. You might come up against an obstacle where you just know, I need more Tinykin, and so that encourages you to just plain explore around the level because you find Tinykin very often. And that's yet another thing alongside just collecting currency and platforming. The feel of collecting new Tinykin, it just doesn't get old. Every single time you're like, yes, cool, now I can use them for this other thing. Or like, oh, I have so many of this type, let's blow a bunch of stuff up. Wow, I was supposed to be talking about negatives and I think I just wound up talking about more things that I like. That should give you a good idea of how I feel about the game. Beyond that, I don't know. I guess one thing I can say is that I've been primarily playing the game on the Steam Deck. Is that how I should title this? Like I'm doing a Steam Deck review? I mean, it's not really a Steam Deck review. And I probably won't be able to get much footage captured from the Steam Deck because it's a trickier process than I expected it to be. However, I will say that both the demo and the full game run very well on the Steam Deck, certainly in terms of performance. There's been nothing noticeably bad. Frame rates all seem solid. I don't have them measured out. It's been running very well for me. However, the big issue I've been having with Tinykin on the Steam Deck is cutscenes. You just can't watch cutscenes playing this game on the Steam Deck. I don't know why. I mean, it's got to be some part of the Proton compatibility layer. There's something going on there, I guess. Seems strange since I assumed they would just be like video files that are triggered to play at a certain point. But the intro cutscene, and then you get cute little cutscenes for the introduction of each new kind of Tinykin, just do not play on the Steam Deck. But it shows you the like technical error test screen that you would get on old broadcast TVs. And then in the bottom right corner, you just get a window of static. So yeah, you literally just don't get to watch the cutscenes. You do get the audio coming through just fine. Yeah, not the best. Obviously doesn't directly impact gameplay, except for the fact that you might miss the introduction of what a Tinykin actually does, so you have to look around for a tutorial robot. But outside of that, I mean, yeah, it's 100% compatible. Am I certified to market as like approved on the Steam Deck? Because I don't know how many other people have been playing it on the Steam Deck. It's absolutely a game that I really enjoy having in the handheld form, and though it is available on the Switch too, I don't know, I'm more confident in how the Steam Deck will be able to perform, and it's also not too hard on the Steam Deck's battery, so it's just a great option for the 5 people who have Steam Decks right now. And what else should I get into? Oh, the big thing. This is a Game Pass game. I am 95% sure that this released with Game Pass day one. So my goodness, if you don't have the $20-25 to buy the thing outright, or you don't feel like doing that for whatever reason, please check it out on Game Pass, download it. It's not a big download at all. If you've agreed with anything I've said in this or related to some of these preferences in terms of the stuff you play, I think you'll be charmed. It is just an incredibly charming game. It's something that continues to motivate the player. It doesn't have many snags for even just a moderately experienced game player person. And it's easy to like. It's also completely fine for like young kids and stuff. I've not come across anything inappropriate or like adult. It's been squeaky clean. It's just a very positive, happy kind of game. And to me, at least, it's so much more interesting and compelling than some of the bigger name indie titles that have been released this summer. Like I think this is miles more interesting than a lot of those. Extremely consistently rewarding, which ends up being one of the biggest factors behind my enjoyment of a game. So that's that. Thank you so much for joining me for this rambly talk about a somewhat new game that only a handful of people will watch. I hope I did a half decent job, and I hope that you had fun coming along for the ride. That's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.